Hey, how's it going? I'm Nick, and I'm your host on the Echo Academy podcast, a podcast dedicated to uncovering helpful tools and strategies to improve your quality of life at work. On today's show, we discuss ways in which you can mitigate stress in your work environment. My guest today is Sha'en Yeo. Sha'en is a pioneer graduate of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology, or MAPP, at the University of Pennsylvania. As the founder of Happiness Scientists, she has trained over 10,000 people in schools and organizations on the science of happiness. She has also been featured on multiple media channels, including TV, newspaper, and radio. Recently, Sha'en also completed her first TEDx talk on the topic of happiness. If you'd like to find out more about Sha'en and this episode, you can go to echo.academy/Sha'en. That's ekho.academy/SHAEN. Sha'en is experienced on the topic of stress and happiness, so this episode is filled with useful nuggets for you to practice. So without further ado, here's my interview with Sha'en Yeo. All right, Sha'en, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So today I'm really interested in our conversation because it's around something that I face at some point in life, and I think something we all face, in the workplace, and that's stress at work in the work environment. So given what you do as a profession, I thought it'd be great to understand from you, some ways to mitigate stress and
Sure.
how to even understand and deal with it. So
Mm.
I guess to start things off, maybe it'll be good to understand, what made you go into this line of work.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I guess I started off my career as a teacher. Yeah, and in working with students, I saw that many of them were academically very strong, but when it came to responding to challenges and failure, a lot of them were not able to respond, I guess, in a way that was helpful for them. Like, for example, they would cry, they would have breakdowns, they would slam the table. So, emotionally, going through these challenges and failure was actually, it was not instinctive for them. They didn't know what to do. And I started to think about what was my role as a teacher. Was it just to teach them subjects, or was it to teach them to be a human being that can leave the school eventually and be able to take care of themselves and flourish? And I guess in the exploration of solutions for these kids, I stumbled upon Martin Seligman's book called Learned Optimism.
Right.
And I thought, wow, you mean you can actually teach optimism? I mean, I thought that it was just something that we're born with, right? You're either a pessimist or an optimist. That's what we hear.
Yeah.
Growing up.
Why did you think that? Why did you think that it was something we were born with instead of learn?
I don't know. I think it's just it was a notion that was conveyed to me. Either maybe it's what people were saying about topics like these. And I guess myself, I always thought of myself as a pessimist, because when I go through difficulty, I would always be like, this is going to be terrible. I would think of the worst case scenario. I know it probably doesn't sound logical given my profession now, but at the time I just thought, when bad things happen, it's because of me, right? And therefore, when I heard this term learned optimism, it was kind of an oxymoron. You mean I can be different? You mean my students can be different? Yeah, so after reading the book and I tested it out with my students and it worked, yeah, I just said, oh my goodness, what is this field of possibility that can help children, but in the consequence of applying it has also helped me.
Right.
Yeah, so that was kind of how I forayed into this area of work.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I mean, judging from what you said, apart from the things that cause us stress and overwhelm, what you saw in your kids was just the inability to cope with it as well.
That's right.
Is that because we didn't learn to, as in we were not taught how to learn or how to cope well with these things, or is it just because things are just way too much for us to even know how to dissect it and really bring it down to something that's manageable?
I think to answer your question is both. Yeah, I think we don't explicitly teach, at least that's my belief. Now it's better, but that was, we're talking about 10 years ago when I was teaching,
Yeah.
that although we taught children how to be values oriented, how to build character, I don't think we explicitly taught them how to deal with challenges and failure in a way that was helpful.
Right.
Right. And not sure about you, but growing up, I think the messages that I heard was, well, if it's difficult, just deal with it.
Right.
But how do you deal with it?
Yeah.
And when, like, for example, when I was going through primary school and secondary school, I was bullied. So I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I just tried to respond in the best way that I knew, which was not actually healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if I were to tell my parents, they'll tell you, I went through that as well. So I
Right.
don't think that explicit teaching was there. In terms of the context of what's happening to children now and maybe even 10 years ago, definitely they've had to deal with more things than I think we did, right? For example, technology is so new, and now they have to, I mean, aside from physical bullying, they have to think about cyber safety and all of that.
Yes.
So they do have a lot to deal with, which means that if we're only teaching them to deal with the normal school going things, it's not even enough, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's both.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting, and it's true, like even for me, I felt in school, I think there was this assumption that all students are the same, or just the way the curriculum and schools function. I can't say so much about now because I don't know, but back when I was in school, there was almost this underlying assumption that all students are the same. So if one person could deal with this kind of stress or 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 challenges, then technically any other student should be able to. Whereas there was almost this lack of understanding that some people just have different ways of dealing with it, or some people have different circumstances, and because of that, you cannot expect the same outcome
Yeah.
as any other student.
Yeah, and also family circumstances. There are many contributory factors to building resilience.
Yes.
So individual characteristics is just one part of it. So how about support from home? How about peers that they mix with? How about the school environment that could be nurturing and provide that familiar environment for children who do not have it at home?
Right.
How about the wider community and the understanding of how to deal with stress in a productive way? All of that plays into whether a particular person can respond well to stress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it brings up the question that we were speaking about before the podcast, which was who takes the lead on dealing with this, right? In this context is in the context of this podcast, is it the workplace, or is it us, or in the context of school? I mean, is the school responsible for every aspect of probably not, right? But yet because a child spends quite a big portion of their waking hours in school, probably some responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it is the formative years for school. I mean, in workplace, obviously, as adults, we assume that we will take full responsibility over our ability to respond to challenge and mental health and all of that. But I think increasingly, there is a bit of pressure on companies to also provide a conducive environment that is free from toxic politics and things like that. I mean, of course, that's idealistic.
Yeah.
But there are companies like Hilton, for example, who really put employee well-being as one of their priorities, and it hasn't caused them to drop in profits,
right,
productivity, but it has created an environment where people come to work and feel satisfied.
Yeah,
and still want to contribute, probably even more than they would do normally. So it is definitely something doable, and of course it requires companies to have foresight and good leadership to walk the talk and all of those factors.
It seems it does seem like the only way to go, because I mean, when you're dealing with humans, you have to deal with people, or us, or humans in totality.
Yes.
And so to only expect and I always bring this up, it's funny because of the nature of work now, many of us tend to bring our professional lives back home to our personal lives. But yet, in many companies, they don't allow personal lives to interfere with professional lives.
Yes.
And I think it's that disconnect, you expect so much from us outside of work, but yet you don't allow us to explore the personal struggle
Yes.
in the workplace. And I think
Mm.
it's those things that make it a difficult work environment for, I mean, not all, but I assume for some.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's a great point that you bring up because we are humans, and it's foolish to think that we can draw the line so clearly.
Yes.
Some people can compartmentalize; they believe they can, but how do you know whether subconsciously their family problems are weighing on them? Financial problems, for example, it's pretty common for quite a lot of people. So if that's weighing at the back of your mind, you can't pay your mortgage,
Yeah,
then it's definitely going to affect the way in which you perform at the workplace. Yeah,
it's
it's
true.
just whether people recognize it as something significant or not. That's another
Yeah.
question.
With regards to the workplace
Mm.
and the stresses, if based off the work that you do, what are some of the common causes of stress in the
Mm.
work environment?
Yeah, I think some of the common causes are number one, of course, workload, just the sheer amount of work that each person has to do. I mean, I've heard of companies where they're hired for X job scope, but they take on Y and Z.
Yeah.
Whether it's because they're capable and competent, therefore they're given more things to do,
Yeah.
or maybe a colleague or someone on the team just had to leave and they had to take on that work. And I think it's expected that they take it on without too much complaint. So
Yeah.
workload is one of them. I think second, perhaps is for young families, people with young children is trying to balance that, wanting to be at home with the children and also wanting to climb the corporate ladder and do very well at work. And so they create these expectations on themselves to do well in all domains, which inevitably could lead to, just fizzling out because it's too much to take for one person.
Right.
And then of course, politics is one thing where team members are trying to outcompete each other as opposed to collaborate towards a common goal.
Yeah.
And I think some other common things are like bosses who are not reasonable and expect them to do the work for them, but can't grant them leeways when necessary.
Yeah.
So these are just some of the, I think, more common contributory factors at
Right.
the workplace.
And it's interesting because and this is something I would love to hear your opinion on is all these stresses are common in the workplace for many, if not all of us. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the cause of our stress. It's just an issue. Is there a way we can identify what the causes of our particular stress or where it's coming from?
I mean, of course, there are surveys that people can do to identify where the stress is coming from. But I mean, the assumption is that the person has the level of self-awareness to even know where, which particular aspect of their life is creating it. And it's also possible that it could be just an accumulation of stress from different aspects of life. Right, so familial stress, financial stress, wanting to hustle and achieve everything stress,
Yes.
boss stress. But I mean, it's not impossible to kind of narrow it down, but it can be done through surveys or focus groups or providing space for employees to actually reflect, right, periodically, if it can be structured in, so that they can do a stock take, for example, and say, this quarter, what has allowed me to do well in my work, but what have been the obstacles? Then with that clarity and white space, they can then try to tweak, and adjust for the next quarter, for example.
Yeah, and I think this is something like we can do on our own as well, whether it's weekly, monthly, or as you mentioned, quarterly. We can just sit down and kind of understand what are the things that really was the barrier to us feeling mentally well throughout this experience. I suppose the challenge after that is figuring out how to solve that problem, right?
It's true.
Because it's one thing to identify what the stresses are, but it's another thing to know how to solve it. Do you have any thoughts on what one might be able to do to even think about
I mean, I think, of course, there are tried and tested tools. right? So for example, if let's say the stress is caused by communication or misunderstandings or relationship, you could upskill and learn how to better communicate, right? And if let's say it's a relationship issue with someone in your team or even someone at home, then the question becomes, how much do you want to resolve this issue, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes courage to face your issues in directly, and to have a conversation which can clear misunderstandings, which could potentially reduce your stress level significantly. Not everybody has the courage,
Yes.
and
yeah.
even if you have the courage, you still need skill to be able to conduct that conversation, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
It sounds like that's another level of stress.
yeah.
There's, now I need to deal with it in a tactful way. It's like, what if I don't know?
Yeah, but I actually teach a course on handling difficult conversations, simply because difficult conversations are a significant sort of stress, particularly at the workplace, right?
Right.
And whether it's talking to your boss, talking to your team member, talking to your clients, when things are you're not seeing eye to eye, and if you continue that down, then it becomes prolonged misunderstandings, which
Yes.
if you have to see the person every day, it's just this black spot that you have to avoid every day, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you may think I can ignore it, but if it's there and you see it, it's the question is, do you want to deal with it now, or do you want to make it manifest until it becomes a big mountain that you have to deal with,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is tricky, but maybe I could delve deeper into that. So, say for example, the stress you face is a result of difficult relationships that you need to communicate. What would you recommend, or or what have you thought in your course that maybe you can kind of summarize within this short session?
So what I would suggest is to, number one, remain objective. Sometimes we are very emotional about people or circumstances which we have a lot of investment in, and where we think we are right and we think the other person is wrong. So the first thing is to put aside the emotions first and focus on objective facts. What did the person actually say? Not what you think he means, because that is kind of read between the lines, which you can't prove. But what did the person actually say? Are there people who actually witnessed that misunderstanding, for example? So number one, be objective. Number two, use empathy. And by empathy, I mean really think about what it's like for the other person. Now, that's challenging because you'd rather believe that you're right and the person's wrong. But by taking that extra step, it's not that you have to give him or her the benefit of the doubt 100%, but it's more thinking, well, what is it from his or her angle that could have been a challenge that resulted in this particular behavior they showed to us? Right? Because just like you have your reasons for being angry, they probably have their own reasons, which they too find valid.
Yeah.
Right? So that step of empathy and seeing it from their perspective. And then the next thing is to kind of, once you've thought through the objective facts, you kind of get a sense that, that person is going through this, then it's time to set up a meeting, right? And that in itself could give people a lot of fear. But if you're objective and you're not accusing and you've not gone to make assumptions, and now you've thought about it from this person, now you can set up the meeting and say, hey, I've given it some thought. And what I'd really like to discuss is this particular incident. Would you be willing to meet up?
Right.
Yeah. So then it's put in very simple, straightforward language where there's no hiding, there's no politics involved in trying to prove you're right.
Yeah.
And I found that when you approach it that way, the person on the receiving end is more likely to say yes, because now they recognize that you have put in effort to think about it from their point of view.
Yeah.
Right. So that is a beginning step.
Yeah.
And
I feel like it's almost, what's more important is almost the intention of you wanting to solve the problem rather than you putting in those steps, because then the other party will say, well, this person is well-meaning. He's trying to solve, he or she is trying to solve the problem. Let's see where this goes.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if it's been a prolonged time of misunderstanding, you probably may not get yes the first time.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, but it's even just going through the process helps you to recognize that two parties always contribute to a misunderstanding, and it's never only you are right and the other person's wrong.
Yeah.
And that in itself is already a huge, advancement in the understanding of that relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in terms of, empathy and all these soft skills that you need to kind of, handle these sort of difficult stresses, so to speak.
Mm,
What do you think is critical, besides empathy, in order
mm,
to really understand the other parties or the other reasons why you may be stressed? I mean, because of course there's the internal side, the things you need to
mm,
work on your own, but
mm.
what about outside?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things that you can work on is beliefs, right? I mean, before we have any actions, before the action, there's an emotion. Before the emotion, there's always a thought, a belief about something. So if you're going through a bad patch at work, for example, you have 3 projects in a row which didn't hit your targets, which I can see happening in many workplaces, the natural way to think, I suppose, is that, oh, I suck.
Yeah.
Now, just imagine if that is your predominant thought. What would it make you feel? Quite likely, you will feel sad, helpless, right? And what would it make you do? It'll probably make you lose motivation and give up or stop investing 100% because you say, after investing so much, still discount result. What's the point?
Right.
But what happens is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if you stop investing, the next project is likely going to be poorly done as well, which will then reinforce the belief that I suck,
Yeah.
right? So one thing we can be aware of is our thought process. When something goes wrong, what is our default? You may have a default of I'm lousy, but then you can catch it and,
Yeah.
and interrogate it or challenge it and say, is it because I'm lousy? Or is it because these projects are too demanding for me at the moment? Or I had these 3 all in a row and I was short-handed. Yeah, it's not lying to yourself. Again, it's being objective about what's the reality of your circumstances, right? And looking at it in a more holistic way as opposed to, oh, let me blame myself straight away.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's assessing the situation objectively.
Yes.
So just to clarify, so even if that thought is true,
Mm.
it should be disregarded if it doesn't help you get better. Is that what you mean?
No. So, for example, if really after you've done your checks and it really is that you did a bad job, then you acknowledge it, right? And then you can reconcile why you are feeling lousy. Is that I didn't put in my best effort? May not be I suck, but I didn't put in my best effort. Again, a
Right.
little bit of reframing because I suck means you can't change that. But
Yeah.
I didn't put in my best effort means it's changeable and I can work harder the next time. Doesn't mean you don't feel lousy, right? All feelings are okay
Yeah.
as long as they come from something that is objective and not biased and, just based on a one-sided view. So even that shift of I didn't put in my best effort is more energizing than I suck.
Right.
Right?
That's true. Yeah.
Because with that, you can say, okay, so what can I learn from this process?
Yeah.
What can I do better next time? Who can I ask for help? And then if you ask for help, you get an idea, you apply it, that is, you're actually moving forward, right? But
Yeah.
I suck tends to put someone in a position of stagnancy. So how do you get better from there?
Right.
Right? So yeah, I mean, so aside from empathy, I think watching your thoughts, trying to stay objective as much as possible, and when you find yourself either blaming someone too much or taking too much responsibility where it's not necessary, catch yourself and challenge as you would help a friend do,
Right.
right? Because when your friend's telling you, oh man, I must be the stupidest person in the whole world, you're not going to say, yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to say, oh, come on, man,
Yeah.
you had a late night. You just came back from overseas trip. So, but we sometimes do not talk to ourselves that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're less forgiving of ourselves, I suppose.
Yes.
And when we talk about objectivity,
Mm.
I suppose the real challenge is, as you mentioned, catching yourself at
Mm.
that right moment, right? Because it almost has to be a reflex, oh, I'm thinking this way. No, let's think objectively. Do you have any ways that we can just make it more mechanical?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any skill, it requires practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, which means that you have to put in effort. Yeah, so in the book that I mentioned earlier on Learn Optimism, they
Yeah.
actually have this very simple ABC template
Mhm.
of process, whichever you call it, which A means activating event. Identify what triggered a particular thought. B is the thought. So you actually write down the thought. And then C is the consequence, which is what were the emotions I felt? What is the action that I took? So without judging yourself, you could just take note in a kind of a journal form. And it's just these 3 points.
Right.
When things do not go your way, or even when things do go your way. So that it just becomes a practice and a habit. Yeah, and even let's say you got triggered and you couldn't stop the slippery slope, at least you are mindful that I went down the slippery slope for a while. Like I
Yeah.
self-indulge in my own pity for a while.
Right.
But then you recognize that, maybe there's something in what I was thinking that I needed to
Yeah.
address. And then you go back to it later. But if you don't do any of this at all, then you don't have the habit and practice of even noticing that it's there.
Right.
Yeah. So just like, if you want to get your muscles strong at the gym, you're not going to go to the gym and just watch people do the
Right.
weightlifting and you do nothing.
Right.
You
Right.
have to lift the weight and build up that muscle. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I was speaking with one of my previous guests. I believe it was Susan. She's a executive coach, and we did a small practice. And ever since then, I'm also like I keep practicing and keep myself mindful of all the times when I get triggered. And the first thing now that I'm more aware of it, I notice like my chest gets really warm, and because that's when I get agitated. So for me, like to your point, the practicing part really helps because at first, it takes a while for me to notice. I go through the process. I'm like, oh yeah, I am feeling a bit agitated, and then I notice my chest like being warm and uncomfortable. Whereas now it's the other way around. I feel my chest first, and I'm like, okay, so
Right.
eventually it becomes a reflex, and then
That's
from
right.
practice it becomes automated, and now I know like, okay, now I need to take a step back and almost like recuse myself of the of the situation and then come back at a different time. So
Yeah.
I agree with that.
yeah, and I think there's no harm in letting getting into a situation. You can always let the person know by expressing the emotion, saying that I'm feeling really agitated at the moment,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's the best time for us to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And then you just step away, because by labeling your emotion, it also helps the brain and your body and your nervous system to take that breather.
Right.
Yeah.
But that for me at first was really hard to do, because now I do that. But at the start, I don't think my ego would have let me. I must
It's
finish
true,
the
it's true.
argument
Yeah,
now.
yes, of course.
Let's hate each other for a little while more. But yeah, I totally understand.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true.
But in terms of um, creating a space where, let's say, you work within a team, right? And whether you're a team that's functional or dysfunctional, how can we work together to make sure that we can help each other whenever another party is feeling stressed, or help them avoid any form of stressor?
I think, I always believe in prevention versus intervention, right? When things get bad and you are trying to fight fire, we call that intervention.
Right.
Yeah. But I think for teams, I really advocate working on prevention. By prevention, it means that in good times, you build up what we call emotional bank account, right?
Yeah.
So,
And what is that? Can you explain?
so for example, being grateful, right, to the team members when you notice they've done things. And honestly, as you work as a team, there are a lot of good things that people are doing, which we sometimes don't notice. Yeah, but we kind of take for granted he should do it because he is part of the team.
Right.
Yeah, but if we took on the lens of gratitude, for example, and we say thank you for chipping in those extra hours on the weekend. I know you didn't have to, but because you did that, the team was able to get together. And let's say you do that as a habit as well, what you're doing is building up this bank so that when things get stressful, instead of only thinking about the things that didn't do well, you actually have this repository of exchanges of gratitude within each other, which would, number one, mitigate stress better.
Right.
Right? Gratitude has been found to be a great stress reliever. Second, you're building the capacity of the team in terms of appreciating each other's capabilities.
Yeah.
Right? So that's, again, by sharing with them, I saw this, I'm grateful for this. People kind of bond.
Right.
Yeah. So, so all of this is what we call prevention and building that bank account. Right? And when things get difficult, as I said, you can say, oh yeah, but during that weekend, he really put aside those 3 hours to help me.
Yeah.
So now when he is going through a difficult patch, maybe I could do the same for him
Right.
or her, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one way. The other way is, yeah, maybe put on what we call an appreciative lens, very similar to gratitude. But instead of saying what's going wrong, we could ask what's going right with our team. When has been the last time where we were all energized? What project was that? Share that with me. Because for all you know, there's one common thing that binds all of us together.
That's right.
But we never talked about it simply because life got in the way or, new projects. But have those conversations at team meetings as opposed to, okay, what's on the to-do list? Let's just get over and done with. Let's go for a client meeting.
Yeah.
But how about those kind of capacity building conversations? Where do we
Right.
want to go as a team? What are the individual strengths on each of us that we can build? Again, it contributes to this bank account. Right. So in times of challenge, crisis, you can say, okay, this problem requires someone who has a strength of creativity. Who in our team has that? And because you've had this conversation, you can say, hey, Nick, you are the one who's very creative in our team. Maybe you can come up with a good solution for this client. Or maybe someone else is very prudent and the company is going through a crisis in terms of not enough funds.
Right.
Hey, let's tap on his prudence and see what are the ways in which we can cut our costs without cutting our quality, right?
Yeah.
But if you've never had these conversations, then and the only conversations are, he doesn't pull his weight. This one all night partying.
Yeah.
Then when it comes to crisis and you're only thinking of weakness, how are you going to overcome it together?
Right.
You know?
So it's almost like you're saying that during the good times, be through compassion or empathy, etc., to build up the team, so that during the bad times, your first instinct won't be to tear down someone.
Yeah, because it only takes one person to tear down the other team member
That's true.
to start the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't know if there's an answer to this and stuff like that, but how do you also handle the mismatch in expectations? I would say, because I suppose in every team there's always one high performer, alpha, that is always overachieving, over exceeding, and more times than not, they are oblivious to everyone's regular standard, I suppose, or a regular set of expectations. And those are also challenges that they may cause stress in the people who feel like they're not putting in their fair share. How do we deal with those kind of relationships, especially in the team?
Yeah, I think having common principles and rules as a way of how the team can operate would be helpful, right? And if you put honest and direct communication as part of the habits and principles, then when someone gets too overbearing or has too high expectations, then there's a common agreement that when you get together or you can give feedback, you can give it in a way that allows the person to know this is not personal.
Right.
But this is, as a practice, we are all doing this. So when you have not done a great job, I'm going to give you feedback, but it's because I want you to do better. And it's because we want the team to grow. Right? So that provides the space for, again, it empowers people as well to be able to go directly to that person who's overbearing and say, no, this is not personal, but it's a principle that we all hold. And can I share something with you? And similarly, he could also say that, hey, I expected more from you, right? So it comes down to communication, right? And I do notice that in workplaces, communication is sacrificed for things getting done,
right?
Yeah. So whether it's empathy or whether it's honesty or being direct, or I think communication is where teams really need to buckle down on, right?
Yeah.
And not take things for granted
Yeah.
and not make too many assumptions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, communication, while key, is also the hardest thing because, everyone has a different way of communicating.
It's true.
And oftentimes I find, and this is from my personal experience, is that um, because of efficiency, people like to communicate via text or via email. But oftentimes I feel that that's not ideal for many cases because it's hard to detect tone.
Yes.
So
You read between too many lines.
exactly,
when
yeah,
there are no
literally,
lines to be
yeah.
read.
Exactly. So sometimes the what you thought was an efficient email can be read wrongly, for better or for worse, of course. And I think that is something that I'm also trying to be mindful of, and that is when conversations require in-person actual in-person conversations, to actually take it offline, because sometimes it's just so easy when you're so busy to be like, all right, message received, regards, Nick. But whereas in reality, you want to show the person that you've actually taken whatever it is that they've said to heart.
Yes,
And
correct.
yeah.
I mean, we always talk, when we do training, we say don't have corridor conversations.
Right.
Because number one, the person may not be ready to receive the information you want to pass to them.
Yeah.
And if they're going for their coffee break and you're going for your coffee break and you say, hey, remember to do this.
Yeah.
They might, but probably nothing went in.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because they're thinking about going for coffee.
Yeah.
So it's not only empathetic communication, it's also prepared communication.
Right.
Making sure the person is ready to receive your information or your feedback.
Yeah.
Mentally prepared, right? And not springing surprise thing on them and expecting them to know how to deal with it straight away.
Right.
Because just imagine if you're walking and your boss says, hey, you better do this. You have no head, no tail.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're expected to do it. Inevitably, something will go wrong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I think the best example of this is always school, right? Like, because school, they never really give you a reason; they just tell you to do it. Like, there's always an absence of reason.
That's
almost
right.
like, because we're kids, we don't require any reason. but in reality, that's the best way to communicate, for you to explain why, and to have them understand whether they agree or disagree. So
I mean, it works at the workplace too.
Absolutely.
And maybe it just needs extra 5 minutes to give the rationale for why you need something done, even if it's urgent. And most people take shortcuts on the most important parts. Right? Which then leads to
under the disguise of time.
But it's always, do you want to save time? Just so that you can get that X thing done, but it's not done the way that you want. Which then leads to more time being spent.
It's true. Yeah, it's a tricky thing to navigate, and like you mentioned earlier, you just have to be mindful whenever it happens. And I think, like, all things being equal, that's the most important thing to focus on. Like, when it happens, to like catch yourself doing it, and really, like, shifting gears.
And I think, if I could add one more thing that's really helpful, it's just to be present. I remember that I was going through a really busy period recently where I had so many engagements, one after another. And on one particular day, I had like 5 meetings. So when I woke up in the morning, I looked at my calendar and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to survive the day? But you see that, number one, that's not a healthy thought to have, because if you already think you're not going to survive, you aren't going to survive.
Right.
But instead, I said, okay, I'd better practice what I tell other people, and that is just be present in that moment. Just do that one thing first. So I happened to arrive early at the client's office. So instead of checking my email, I said, okay, let's just sit down and be present. What am I here at this time to do? And that is meet ex-client, right? And everything else just fade away.
Right.
And then you bring yourself a sense of peace and control that you would not have if you're thinking, after this client, I got to meet that client, I got to prepare for this, I got to prepare. It begins this never-ending anxiety spiral, which then is so hard to get out of.
Right.
So just present. Okay, so I'm done with item 1. Now I'm going to item 2.
Right.
And then when I'm doing item 2, I'm going to be 100% in that, be very present in that, and then go on to item 3. And voila, 5 meetings passed without feeling that overwhelming anxiety, that I would otherwise have had.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to add to that, do you think there's something to be said about energy preservation? Because I mean,
Yes.
there's I think that's one of the reasons why we also get a lot of stress, right? Because it's one thing to have 5 meetings for in one day, but some people pile it on for all 5 days of the week, right?
Yes, yes.
How important is energy, do you think, in energy preservation and all of this?
Mm.
And what are some examples that you use to preserve your energy?
Yeah, so I think it's a great point. Yes, definitely, and it's a limited resource.
Yeah.
And until, and most of us wait till the weekend to top up that resource. Yeah, I would say don't wait till the weekend. That's one. And you can actually use breathing exercises and your lunch hour, for example, to either go and be somewhere near nature or just have that quiet space for yourself where you put aside the technology and recognize that you as a human being, like any machine, also needs rest.
Right.
So, really intentionally plan for that rest in the middle of your workday. And I encourage people to do that. That's
Right.
one. Number 2, sometimes I find that people worry. Yeah, they worry about something that's happening next month. For example, I remember working with this client who said, I've got this presentation in front of my CEO. I said, when is it? Next month. Then I said, okay, so why are you worrying about it now? Because I'm not prepared. I said, it's next month. Of course you're not prepared.
Yeah.
And he said, but but if I'm not prepared, then of course I'm worried. Then I said, but is that something you need to worry about today? Again, is that being present. And then he realized that, no, I don't have to worry about it now. 2 weeks to the presentation, maybe it's time to start worrying
Right.
and then start to prepare. But he was worrying about it in the background of his mind, which takes up energy, right? It reduces your ability to focus because your brain is somehow distracted by that thing. Yeah. And when he started practicing it a bit more consciously, he realized there's so many of these worries constantly on the head. Well, no wonder you're stressed.
Yeah.
So so practically for people who are, really want the practical thing, is really writing down the stuff that you have to do and then put it in terms of priorities, right? What is something that I need to attend to that's urgent, important tomorrow, right? And then how about next week? You can write it down first so that mentally you have attended to it, but then only come to deal with it when it's time.
Right.
So that you're not overtaxing that energy that you're talking about.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I would like to add to that, and these are not I think this is the wonderful thing about doing all these podcasts, because I learned from other guests as well that I can now drop it like it's my own knowledge. But
feel free.
Yeah, but the first one was one of the my earlier podcast with a guy named Alex. He runs a holistic wellness facility here. And he said, like, I mean, because we humans are solar powered, like the best way to really get energy is, especially in the mornings, to really be in the sun, because it really, it wakes us up, it kind of takes away the sleep hormone, I want to say. I'm not sure if hormone is the right word, but you get my point.
Yeah.
But really just to almost like, it's almost like because you're solar powered, your energy just goes up full bar because you've exposed yourself to the sun.
Yeah.
That's something I've been actively doing on a daily basis now. Be it whether I walk to work or just spend some time in the sun before work or during lunchtime. And I find it helps. I can't say whether it just makes me energized, but it just makes me feel alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that makes sense, but I really
Yeah, but I
feel
mean the sun is vitamin A. Is it vitamin A or
D, I
vitamin D?
Yeah.
And I think as you are out in the sun, it's also you are not you are dropping everything else that being in an office represents, isn't
That's
it?
true. Yeah.
So it's just
Very
a
in
shift
nature.
in
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting because I was watching this nature documentary, and and it's this guy who lives in the forest, basically. He chose this life for himself, and he says, like, for him, nature is the best way to be present and be mindful,
Yes.
because you can only focus on this because it's really about your safety and preservation. So you can't think about the past or the future because you're trying to survive in the now.
Yeah.
And he says, like, I think because we've gone out of that, into this concrete jungle, it's harder for us to be in the present because we're
It's
not
true.
thinking about the immediate. So ever since then, it's I started to think, like, wow, okay, so what can I do to make it more present? I mean, I'm not successful, but at least
well,
I've
at least you tried, right? Yeah. I mean, and anyway, scientifically, it's been proven that if we spend at least an hour plus a week in nature, it has health benefits, anti-stress benefits. It's simply because nature by itself is healing.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard of forest bathing and all of that.
Right.
Or even if you stay near Bukit Timah, going for a walk amidst all the jungle, it's rejuvenating.
It really
Higher
is.
levels of oxygen, So I think maybe the central theme is being conscious about what works for you. I mean, different tools work differently for different people.
Right.
Yeah, if you have the time, spend more time in nature.
Right.
If you don't have the time, then maybe take time off to just 5 minutes to do more mindful breathing and just staying present what you're doing even as you're going about your work, things like that, so that you don't ever give yourself the excuse that I can't make time for my own well-being, right?
Final question.
Sure.
And it's something that I think listeners can directly learn from your experience per se. What is the greatest tool you have in your toolkit whenever you are feeling stressed?
Good question. The most effective tool I've found is actually just asking myself what is within my responsibility. And I don't know, is it a gender thing? But or maybe it's not. But for me, I find that as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, I tend to want to do things for people. Right? And sometimes when I'm not aware, I tend to overdo and take on someone else's emotions or work even or stress simply because I feel that I need to. So for me, what really works is asking myself, well, is this within my scope of responsibility to do? Right? If it is, then I'll take full responsibility for it and I get it done. But if I find myself over worrying about something that I cannot control, that's my daughter's thing, for example, and it's easy for people to impress their stress upon you.
Absolutely.
Right? But we have to learn to draw that boundary. Yeah. So when I ask myself this very focusing question, I realize, yes, I'll do what I can. And it's not being selfish. It's self-preservation almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if my daughter is stressing about what class she's going to next year and she keeps asking me, I don't have to give in. I can say, I'll check when I have a breather on my own time. So that is taking responsibility for myself. And I find that just by being conscious about asking myself this question, I have become, it's much lighter. Yeah. And then when I have the bandwidth, okay, I can take on a little bit more. But if you're going through a stressful period, my suggestion is I ask yourself, are you doing things outside what you need to do?
Right.
Yeah. And is there a way in which you can lean on others? Outsource it, or find different ways of doing it that play to your strengths, things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I could summarize and then correct me if I'm wrong, it's to ask yourself focused questions so you can set boundaries.
Yes, that's right.
Got it.
Yeah.
And and I start in how I handle stress, or how I handle my stress alleviation is for me personally is always to speak with my wife, because I find between the two of us she's the more rational one, and because of that she can help dissect a little bit more. I mean, I guess in a way, instead of asking myself the focus questions, I ask her.
Someone.
So
no wonder you married her.
So she gives me the answers. Okay, then I just follow. But I think just having someone to vibe off, to talk to, and help you rationalize things that maybe it's just difficult for you to rationalize.
It's true.
Really helps you, or it helps me a lot to just,
Mm.
like, and so yeah, sometimes I always feel like having a good support network is
Yes.
also important.
Yes, absolutely. I think among all the predictors of well-being, relationships is always comes out as one of the most significant predictors. Yeah.
agree.
So investing in connection, and other people, instead of spending time shopping. Not that shopping is bad. Sometimes you can have that.
Yeah, of course.
But
yeah.
if you can intentionally put in these support structures, then similarly, just like building that emotional bank with your colleagues, you're
Yes.
building an emotional bank in your own life
Yeah,
with the people that matter.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find what you say really helpful and very insightful. I know you
Thank
do
you.
this. I know you do this for corporates and organizations as well.
Yes.
At the risk of butchering what you do, maybe I'll give the floor over to you, and you can explain what you do and maybe how they can get in touch if they want to request your services.
Yeah, so my company is called Happiness Scientists, and as the name implies, we use the science of positive psychology to increase the happiness levels of individuals and organizations. So what we do is that we provide bespoke, customized training solutions in the form of workshops or speaking engagements or even consultancy to support how you can, structurally create a workplace that will allow employees and even yourself as a boss, for example, to flourish. Yeah, so training is centered on the evidence-based research coming out from the field of positive psychology and neuroscience. And I guess being a former teacher, we know how to design the program for maximized learning. And it's not one of those programs where you go through, feel motivated, and forget all about it, but we really design it so that learning takes place and people who go through our programs can apply it to their daily lives and also to enhance the quality of other people's lives. Yeah. So, you can get in touch with us, and our website is www.happiness-scientist.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they able to reach you on LinkedIn
Yes.
as well?
So if you Google on LinkedIn, you can find me at Sha'en Yeo, MAPP,
Okay.
which is a Master's in Applied Positive Psychology. On Facebook is Happiness Scientist.
Got it. Yeah. Don't worry. I'll put it all in the description.
Okay,
So
sure.
it'll be much easier for them to find you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Shaen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. It's been
And,
fun.
I'm sure the listeners would have benefited a lot from it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.